Hello there. Welcome to Herbal First Aid. My name's Seven Song, and this is herbfirstaid.com. Today we're going to be starting off by looking at my herbal run bag, or my first aid bag. The expression run bag is often used to denote a bag that you carry on you when you go into a first aid situation. As we've talked about in other classes, that's in comparison to your back stock, where you keep your larger bottles to refill later. But this is the bag that's usually out and available for people. And first I want to talk about the bag itself. And I'm going to start to flip it and show the different segments, and then we're going to cover it. In this part of the class, I'm not going to talk about how I use all the individual medicines. This is just how to basically stock your bag for different situations, and then afterwards we'll talk about the specifics about using different plants. In case any of you have missed it, I tend to be somebody who has a lot of setup and wind-up before going into the specific medicines. I feel like often herbalists are just taught how to use herbs, specific herbs, rather than how to treat people. So here's how to set up a first aid bag or make one. I had this bag made maybe 10 years ago already. I spent $500 on having the bag made. Actually, I'm looking for a new bag and hoping someone else will make it, and I would be glad to spend more. So it's not an off-the-shelf bag that I purchased and had redone. I had somebody who is a professional bag maker, backpack maker. We designed the bag. This is actually the second bag in a series. The next bag will be different yet, because each one I find out what improvements I need to make. So once again, the bag was made specially for me. The person who makes it does not make them anymore. It was never really worth, I mean, $500 was not worth her time, because it was not, how many people are going to buy this bag. So for those interested, though, it might be a good small business to make. And I'm going to describe a little bit about why it was so expensive to make, partially just because it was done from scratch. So some of the things that are special about this first aid bag as opposed to smaller first aid bags. The first is simply that it's actually made to be carried. So it's got a really good back. It's got a good waistband on it and good straps. You can see in parts it's been tearing over time. Of course it is. It's been being used extensively. So the first part is just that it's really, the first one we made was designed to hold herbs, but not so much designed to run with. Other things you can see on it, just like other bags, I can put a foam pad down in here so I can carry, we talked about in another class, how to carry a foam pad or a blanket in case somebody's on the ground and you need to make them more comfortable. So that's part one. The next part is the material is just really strong. It is really excellent material, and though you can see in places where it's ripped, it's not the material itself. In fact, all the times it's been dragged here and there, the bag itself hasn't ripped. So it has 3 separate compartments to it. And in between the compartments, it's cushioned. Initially, when I designed this bag, designed it for glass bottles. Now, I'm going to talk about the plastic bottles in here, but I rarely carry glass anymore for reasons that we'll discuss. But still, the cushioning is helpful, though it does add weight. So this bag, filled on an average first aid run, will weigh somewhere about 21 pounds. 18 to 21 pounds is the average weight for it as it's being used now. Other things that are different about this bag, this holds water bottles, but actually I rarely use it because putting that much weight on the back of me and on the very back side just hurts my back, honestly. So I could put other things in there, but initially these were water bottles. These things detach, but I don't put much water in them. But as I said, water is important. If I need to, I can. This pocket here is where I keep stuff that I need immediately or just use often. So I'm going to go through the different things in this pocket. Once again, you see how, even though years later, this bag is just not ripped, and it gets dragged and dragged. I mean, it's on the ground a lot. So some of the things in this pocket, these are respiratory masks, and I talked about them previously. A respiratory mask is basically a disposable face mask, and John, if you can show me up here. And that way, if you're looking into somebody's throat, or if it's just really dusty outside and you need to protect your mouth and your nose, these things, they won't work in any kind of gassing or anything if you're doing street protests. But they are good if you're looking in somebody's throat, as we'll talk about. so that you don't exchange germs with them. That's a respiratory mask. The next is a small amount of disposable gloves. There are more disposable gloves inside this bag as well as in back stock, but I always have a few. I put gloves on and take them off all the time, dispose them. While I have these in hand, I'd like to just show people how to take off disposable gloves after using them. So putting them on is pretty obvious, right? Nothing fancy there. There's latex gloves like these are cheaper, but some people definitely have allergies, and they could be serious allergies. The allergies for latex are not just a matter of it's you touching people, especially if they're sensitive individuals. So, but these are latex. Sometimes I have non-latex. A lot of my first aid stuff just comes and goes. So you put the gloves on. That part, of course, is easy, making sure that they don't have any tears in them. While I'm on the first aid gloves, I want to say that there was a while I resisted them a little bit because of an impersonalness. And over the course of time, I found exactly the opposite. When I put gloves on to work with people, there's an air of professionalness. And I think that most people just really appreciate somebody taking the time to make sure there's not a transference of germs. So if I was working with somebody and let's say cleaning out a wound over here, cleaning it out, and now my gloves are clearly stained and potentially infectious, how you take the gloves off is you take them from the outside so my hand is not touching my wrist. You don't want this to touch like this, right? This glove is infected and I don't want to be touching myself. So you grab the glove, and you pull the glove off inside out. So this part is clean. And then you take the inside of this glove and you bring the other glove off. And then you throw them out. So in other words, your hand never touches the outside of the gloves, and then you put them in waste disposal. Depending on how bad the infection was, depends on which bags of medical waste they go into. So that's using disposable gloves. So back to this bag. I have a stethoscope in here. I don't use it that much. I'm learning how when I went to Nicaragua to help out there. It's not a cheap stethoscope. It's actually just a regular good quality stethoscope. They're about $75. I'm learning to use it, but I want to say that even though I pulled it out of my bag, it's something I hope to learn more, and it's not something that that I have as much skills as I hope to gain from them, though it could be very helpful, of course, in respiratory ailments and cardiovascular problems. If you do use a stethoscope, if you are trained to use one, whether or not you're professional or not, they could be really helpful things in first aid circumstances to try to decide what's a first aid problem, from what's a long-term chronic problem, what's pneumonia, from something maybe not quite as bad. So stethoscope. Of course, a little stuffed animal. This does come in very handy. This is so when I'm working with children, something we could discuss a little bit, that they have something to play with. You are basically the boogeyman when you're working with children, right? So there's a child crying, the mother is bringing or the father is bringing them there for whether cuts or bruises or diarrhea or constipation, and all of a sudden I'm like the official guy who walks on the scene. And so one thing I could do is offer them, it doesn't always work of course, but is offer them a stuffed animal. You want it big enough where they can't put it in their mouth and swallow it. Anyone will do. I've had this one for years, but these are washable. So after a couple of, whenever I get an opportunity, I wash it because it's been in children's mouths and it goes from person to person. But it is handy. It's not something you would need in other situations, street medic situations or car travel. But actually, if you're going to be working in large events and there's children there, having a non-swallowable stuffed animal, meaning just big enough, is really handy. Also, you can use this stuffed animal to give children medicines and such. And so that's one way to try to convince kids to take these yucky tasting formulas. I mean, how adorable, right? How could a child resist that? They can resist it great. Next is a headlamp. This is a smaller LED. In another class, I displayed my larger clunky one that actually I like a lot. But this one is just a small one that can fit on and just really light. And the batteries, this one has 3 AAA batteries, but it lasts a pretty long time. And it's bright enough. I want to just point out the difference between LED lights and your incandescent bulbs, your normal bulbs. The problem with LED lights are really bright and they last a long time. But when you buy them, make sure that sometimes they have a bluish cast to them. That bluish cast is generally not a problem, except when you're looking in wounds or the back of somebody's throat, and where that dull, that softer glow is not helpful. So I also carry just a regular, this is a mag light, but any of these good quality flashlights. And this bulb is different. You can't see it in the light here, but it gives a much stronger white light. And that is just easier to see in infections and in the back of people's throats. Another point to that is that I don't know about other folks out there, but one of the things that I despise is having lights in my eyes at night. It's just one of those things that automatically triggers me and I just become immediately irritable. So I do wear a light to navigate, but when I'm looking at people, I don't want to have a light on my head that's constantly going in their eyes and everybody else's eyes as I turn around. So I can shut that off when I'm looking at them and use a much more directed beam, like a small flashlight or any flashlight at all. So that's just a consideration. Because when you're working at night, it's easy to blind people with flashlights. It's something, obviously, that I don't like much at all. I have a pair of reading glasses, because I'm now in my early 50s, and reading glasses are de rigueur for my eyes at this point. These are especially made by the dollar store. And I carry a bandana. You might notice it goes well with my apparel. And this way, if I have a fancy meal, I can lay this out. No, this is not for a fancy meal. But this is basically to tie around me. If I'm looking at a lot of people's throats or it's just really dusty. The respiratory masks are not as comfortable as these. And you got to admit, it's got a certain appeal to a certain entourage of people. So the black bandana. And that's about it in here. So I'm going to put these back in here. They get stuffed back in. They're all these things are things that, are separated in a way where I can put them back and forth quickly. Remember, organization is really crucial to first aid. It's often you're in a rush, and if you have to find your flashlight and it takes you a few minutes, it's enough time for something worse to happen. So we're going to go through this layer by layer. Some layers are more interesting than others. So I'll start here. And what you're going to start to see is the way that I have tincture bottles set up. So this is the thing that was important when we devised it. It needed to hold the different sized bottles, but it was important that we can see what's on the labels. Otherwise, it just takes a really long time to find anything. So organization, and so the bottles have changed since I've had this bag made. So if you're out there and you want to make a new bag, and I don't have one already, I'll be glad to pay you big bucks, definitely make it worth your while, to design a bag, and these are some of the ideas. So that is trolling for a new bag here. But just to keep going, we'll come back to this one, is I can see the labels really easy. So this clear plastic has worked good. The problem is I changed bottle sizes, and so now we've had to put these pieces in them to hold stuff in, which is okay, but actually I like it simple and quick and easy and accessible. But that part has worked great. So the next part here is why plastic bottles rather than glass bottles. Some of this is going to be obvious. The first thing is they don't break and they weigh less. So this bag with glass bottles weighs pounds more, and pounds more on my aging back is just something I don't want to have to put up with. I don't want to have to carry more weight. I'd rather carry less weight. So these are high quality plastic. These bottles cost more than glass bottles because it's just harder to find plastic that doesn't break down. So the question that I commonly get, and it's a good question, is does the alcohol interact with the plastic in such a way to break down the plastic? And it's pretty clear that some plastics broken down in alcohol create what are called xenoestrogens, or kind of false estrogens, synthetic estrogens that might interact with people. And that's a possibility. So what I have to do is have to throw the bottles out every once in a while and change them. But in general, most of the things are short term, and they're not getting a lot of medicine from any single bottle. But it's a consideration. Glass is much more inert than plastic. But I'm going to use plastic, and I'm going to use a high quality plastic that's cleanable and doesn't break down easily with alcohol. You can look them up in plastic catalogs. People sell these bottles regularly. There's nothing particularly fancy. The droppers are your standard droppers. So it's just, these are also kind of expensive if you buy these, because they have glass and plastic and rubber. Now I'm going to have John focus the camera on the bag over here to show you my bigger fear is not the plastic, it's the rubber. So all of you folks who use tinctures and bottles regularly all know one big problem is that these rubber things definitely break down, and sometimes your medicine tastes like rubber. I mean, it definitely will get rubber flavor, and it's not magic, it's rubber. So unless you think rubber is magic, it does come from a tree. So, but if you look here, you can see that the bag is on its side, and it's always on its side. So that means that the alcohol is constantly going into the rubber, and the rubber will break down much faster. So twice a year, I have to go through all these droppers and just throw out all the ones that the rubber has broken down in. So my apprentices today, we'll reintroduce the apprentices. This is Annie. This is Mario. And this is Christian. One thing that they'll be doing while working with me over the next year, besides going to the free clinic and helping me there, is they'll be going through this bag every couple of months to make sure that none of these are broken. And one way to see that is if you take it and you just pinch it around, you can see if it's starting to come apart. This one is not. Though the color is changing from heat. We'll talk about heat in a moment. So that's a problem. And even if they're not breaking, even if they don't leak, which leakage is a problem here, also it just it puts rubber in my medicine. I don't want rubber. I don't know what the effects, long-term effects of rubber and tincture in people's bodies are, but I assume it's just not good. So the plastic is a problem, but for me actually the rubber is a bigger problem that seems harder to figure out what to do with. So that's plastic, rubber dropper bottles. This bag is often subjected to a lot of heat. So I'm often carrying, I mean, it can be cold as well, but often when I'm doing first aid, I'm outdoors, often in summer or spring, or places like Nicaragua where it's just really hot and everything could break down a little bit. The bag itself has held really well. But all the other ingredients definitely break down with a lot of heat. I worked post-Katrina, I went to Mississippi. So I went to Waveland, Mississippi a week after the Hurricane Katrina hit, and I brought my bag and it was 105 and humid, and I could almost smell everything roasting in my bag. So it's just a consideration. That's, by the way, another place where herbal first aid, I don't think I've mentioned, can be really helpful, which is disaster relief. If you have it in you, you can be very helpful. It's tricky as an herbalist. That would be a whole other discussion, how to be an herbalist working in one of those situations. But I personally am drawn to helping people when disaster helps. I mean, it would be untrue for me to say otherwise. I don't wish for disasters, but they are common, and I like to be somebody that helps out with them, and I like to use herbal medicine and learn from people around me. So that's the overlay of the bag, and now I want to show you some of the individual things in the bag without describing so much how I use them. So we'll start over here. So in this compartment right here, if I make this again, by the way, more zippers. And these are all high quality zippers. Lisa, who made it, did a great job. So I'm going to just take everything out and show you what they are. This, by the way, none of this is planned. Like as I'm reaching in and taking stuff out, I'm hoping that everything looks good because it's always ready to go. But what I didn't do is really fix this bag up, except to make sure that I have enough bottles in here, making sure that the slots are filled. I didn't really go through it and say, okay, I want to show this bag for an audience. This is my first aid bag, and it's basically generally ready to go. So as I reach in here, I'm just hoping some crazy stuff doesn't come out. I'm not sure what it would, maybe a live squid, some seahorses, and of course, toad eggs. But there are no toad eggs in here. So I'm going to put these back in, and as I put them in, I want to explain just what they are, not so much how to use them. So this and these, this is Yunnan Payao, and if you're trying to figure out what I'm saying, there'll be handouts associated. Yunnan Payao is a hemostat. So it's mostly herbal medicine. Nobody's really quite sure except the people that make it. It's a Chinese prepared medicine, and it's the best medicine I know for helping stop bleeding. It's taken internally. It can be used externally, but internally it works better. So I have it in capsule form and I have it in powder form. I always have a few different salves. And while I'm showing you salves, I want to discuss salves in a little detail. So the first thing is they melt. So I didn't mention it, but when you're doing car travel, often people have salves in their car's first aid kit, but they'll just melt and they'll just make a mess of everything if the lid's not on tight. So salves go bad. They're an oil-based. Everything with oils goes bad pretty quickly. They oxidize, especially exposed to heat. So when you're using salves, it should just be one person's hand in the salve. So what happens frequently is people stick their fingers in the salve, which is fine if it's your salve. But if a lot of people are using this salve, so this is a tissue injury salve, and the person, let's say, actually has an open wound, and you're putting this in an open wound and putting your dirty finger back in an oil wax-based thing, you can clearly keep an infection going. Now the herbs might kill the infection in here, but why take a chance? So basically use a clean applicator, like a Q-tip or whatever applicator you're going to use each time. And you take that out and then you put that on your finger or their finger and then they use it. And then you use a new clean applicator. So basically keep your salve clean. Don't have fingers go in there unless it's just you using them. So I have two salves right now. This one is for infection and this one is for soft tissue injury. I carry a few essential oils. I try to reduce my reliance on essential oils. I like to gather my own medicines. But the essential oils I have here are eucalyptus, tea tree. Hippies love tea tree, by the way. Cloves and patchouli, but I don't need patchouli here. I'm already smelling like sweat. Clove essential oil and lavender essential oil. So these are the 4 essential oils that I carry on me. Any medicines that are toxic, like this one is, which I'm not mentioning at this moment, I keep in here too. So medicines that I just want to make sure nobody else touches because there's a potential toxicity or poisoning, they go in here. These are called Solon-Pos patches. They're anti-arthritic patches, another Chinese medicine. You can make other things. I just have a few of these. They're just easy to give to people. I carry what's commonly called hippie crack or emergency. So by the way, if you're a hippie and you're listening to this, so am I. So we're talking mano a mano or mano a womano or whatever we're doing, mano a tronzo, however we're doing this. So this is emergencies. People love these, and I like them too. I just wish they made them in bulk, but it's easy to give out the individual packets. I don't give them out that freely because they cost about 35 cents each, but definitely they can be a part of a rehydration formula. That later we'll discuss a specific rehydration formula that's much less expensive and works just as well. Cough drops. This is just a few. I often, Traditional Medicinals was very kind to me and sent me a pallet. So when a pallet, I mean this huge, extraordinary amount of cough drops. They call them pastilles. And I use them really regularly, and they're great. They're so easy to give out. So I like cough drops a lot. A lot of coughs out there. This is activated charcoal in capsules. You can't see it, but we'll talk about activated charcoal in detail. So that's what's in there. Next, let's see if there's nothing in here. So tinctures on this side, and now this is kind of your standard first aid gear that would be in anybody's first aid kit. So I'll take them out, and then we'll put them back and discuss them. I'm not sure every standard first aid kit has a hot water bottle, but. So backup disposable gloves. I have lots. I mean, this bag doesn't have many. This bag will be full if I'm going to do first aid. I don't use this very much. It's called a SAM splint, but it's a splint that just works really well, and it folds up and holds onto itself. So you can make a quick splint. I sometimes have longer ones to splint up elbows, but I don't use them that much because they're kind of expensive for doing first aid. So a note on expense. It's all free. So I try to keep my costs down. If I had if somebody donated these come in big pieces. I just cut this off for a finger. I would use them more. But really it's about donations and about trying to make it affordable. This is a hot water bottle. Hot water bottles are probably one of the least used or underused parts of herbal medicine. Hot water bottles do 2 things or a few things really well. Hot water bottles are excellent for spasmodic cramps often. and especially for uterine cramps, some menstrual cramps. Really helpful. The other thing that hot water bottles work great for is we talked about compresses. And if you make a compress and put it on somebody, so if you make a tea, you have a basin, you make hot water and a tea, you put a cloth in the tea, you take that cloth and then let's say put it on a hurt elbow, but it's going to cool really quick. So you want heat at one. There's differences between heat and cold that will be covered later. But when you want heat, you take that cloth and as soon as it's out of the hot water, it's cooling down. And you put on the elbow, within minutes, it's way too cool. So what you can do is get a hot water bottle and just hold that on, and it'll keep the heat longer for the tea. And it'll keep the heat warm for a long time. So I'm a huge fan. The only problem with them is they're kind of heavy, so I would only have it in a bag like this. So hot water bottle, they also tend to stink like rubber. Bandages and Band-Aids and steri strips. So there's no real replacement for Band-Aids. I mentioned it previously, but people often talk about wrapping plants around them. The problem with wrapping a plant around an open wound is that plants carry their own risks of bacteria. I mean, they're free-living organisms that have fungi and bacteria living on them, plus a dog might have peed on them, or worse. So it's just a consideration when you're taking plants and I like to use plants and put them on people, but you have to just be aware that the plant itself could have something on it. And then just taking plant leaves and wrapping them on a wound can be difficult. I guess if you live around banana trees, it would be helpful, but most places in the United States, there's not a lot of big leaves that easily wrap, and then holding them in place is difficult. So I really suggest getting bandages and Band-Aids and tape. So we haven't gotten to tape yet. And Band-Aids just work easy. So I'm saying it because while I do like things that I can gather, I have not found any replacements easily found in nature for Band-Aids. The other thing I would suggest is, they could be expensive. These are called steri strips. And I'll try to upload a photo of two with this that shows steri strips in action, but they're basically sterile tape. And so if somebody cuts themselves, let's say they have a bad cut on their finger and the skin is spread apart, you can use, instead of stitching them, stitching carries its own risks, and you have to be skilled in it, you can just use the tape and hold it closed. So steri strips are a really excellent way of keeping wounds closed to try to prevent scarring and also bacterial infection. So I always have a bunch of different size steri strips. I got a bunch for free once, so it's been easy for me. So that's Band-Aids and steri strips and similar. And a container to hold them so they don't come out. This container's actually lasted maybe 10 years already, surprisingly. Next, I carry a couple of different kinds of surgical tape and other kinds of tape. The different tapes do different things differently, just to use the word different as often as possible here. So like there's the difference between plastic tapes, which are waterproof, but often don't stick as well, and cloth tapes, which conform better to the arm, but sometimes stick too well. So I could do a whole demonstration on the different kinds of tapes. It's not a coincidence that I have 4 different kinds of tapes in my hand. By the way, this one is dirty looking, but underneath it, if I just unwrap it twice, it'll be cleaner there. These are all different tapes that I use for different circumstances, depending whether I'm trying to conform the bandage to them or make it stick in a weird place. Like if somebody gets a boil on their butt cheek, that's you need tape that is on something that moves around a lot, right? If it's on your arm, you can wrap it differently than in other places like your thigh, butt cheeks. So different kinds of tape are helpful. Tape is usually the thing that every first aid station runs through faster than everything else. The tape has gone really fast. It goes fast. It's also expensive, so see if you can line up some donations for surgical tape. So I also carry cold packs. What's been great is over the past couple of years, they've made them small sized. In the past, when you carried a cold pack, it was always this thing that weighed like a pound or two, which is heavy. You know, if it's an 18-pound bag, it's a pound of, 2 cold packs adds 2 pounds. And they've started using smaller ones, so it's just a consideration because weight matters. So cold packs. We'll talk about the uses. This is called vet wrap or Colbane and other names. The problem with it is with heat, it starts to degenerate. This is not actually from that. I don't know why this is like this. But we'll talk about this a little more, but vet wrap is one of my favorite ways to wrap up wounds. Lots of people, it's a real common way. So basically, a quick demonstration with vet wrap. I'm getting out some scissors here. note the scissors are very easy to access to, is that it's just self-sticking. So we'll discuss how to bandage people later, but I would suggest they're like $1.15 a roll. If you can get them cheaper, that's better. There's many different brands made, but the thing about vet wrap is just that it sticks to itself, and so you have less of a reliance on bandages when you use it, and you don't have to use safety pins. So, and very sloppy right here. Hopefully you don't take it as my handiwork. Your wrist, please, Christian. So with this, you want to lay it out. When you put it on, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but can you hold that, please? You can often ask people to hold their own bandages, by the way. You don't have to be the one to do that, because you then have to do this part. And then when I put this on, you'll see that it just sticks to itself. So really handy that way. So that's vet wrap. I usually have a couple of rolls on me. This over here is called band net. And I generally use this in burns. And so when you're putting topical applications on burns, as we'll talk about, you can't really wrap it because the skin on burns is really sensitive. And basically, this stuff expands on arms and legs where you can put your body part in there and just, you could just hold it on there. So you can put bandages on you without using tape. That's the basic idea. So let's get Annie's arm for this one. So Annie's now going to get the fishnet stocking look. So this is really particularly helpful if you're at a first aid event and all of a sudden they start having retro night. And you're like, where's the fishnets? And so if Annie had a burn, let's say on the inside of her arm, I would then put a bandage on it, and then to hold that in place, I could just put this on there and I'll hold it, and if I need to, I can tape this on the outside. And you'll note, once again, if you'll pan Annie in here, Panny, you'll notice how dramatic it helps her attire, which is already nicely done.
Nice.
So that's band net. I don't use it a lot, but really for burns, it's very helpful. I carry a bunch of these small pads, antiseptic washes, alcohol prep pads, to just wash stuff out. It's nice to get them a little bit bigger than this small size, which is just good for fingers, basically. And this is tobacco. So this is native spirit or some organic tobacco. What's the name of this? American Spirit. So this is American Spirit, which is organic. It doesn't have to be, and not all American Spirit is organic as well. But the reason for me carrying tobacco is I don't smoke. And I would suggest to you with a smile, if you smoke and you're watching this, if you stop, you will live a little bit healthier and maybe longer as well. So this is my plea to stop smoking. It's a hard thing to do, but the sooner you do it, the healthier you will be. That really, it's a great idea to stop smoking cigarettes. Tobacco is very addicting, hard to stop, but it's just, there's nothing positive in your body except maybe a little bit of calmness when you smoke. And I just treat a lot of people that have long-term health issues associated with their cigarette smoking. So I know it's not easy, but there are some things out there these days like nicotine patches that could be helpful. So I carry tobacco, not to smoke, but to put on insect stings, as we'll talk about later. So I always have tobacco because it's the best thing for insect stings, but that will come later under insect bites and stings. So that's that section. So we're going to go past the salves, the tinctures, and go into this back section. The first thing is bigger bottles. These are 2-ounce bottles. These are 4 and 8-ounce bottles, different sizes. Other things in here are scissors. You need good scissors. I carry 2, but always a pair of bandage scissors. And what looks like a stain is actually bovidine iodine. That's what's happening right in here. When I mentioned my botany kit, I mentioned beading tweezers. I didn't call them beading tweezers, I am now, but beading tweezers are really sharp and they're excellent for first aid, but you have to control with your hands, otherwise you could stab people. I'm serious about that. They're very sharp and easily will puncture skin or just at least hurt a lot. So if you're pulling something out, you might just want to use your other hand or rest your hand in a way where you can't bang it deeper into the person. But I use beading tweezers a lot. They're my favorite, also for first aid, for botany. So scissors, beading tweezers. The beading tweezers have a little case in here, just cardboard, which is what I put them in. Otherwise, they just tear through everything. Also in tools, I carry a pair of nail clippers because sometimes fingernails are important to cut to get to wounds underneath. And also sometimes to take off pieces of flesh that are hanging off. They really work great for that. You can use very sharp scissors and razor blades, but sometimes, or cuticles that are sticking off, nail clippers work great. In these pockets here, I have some of the tools I use and an embarrassingly dirty eye cup. So I'll empty these out and talk about the different parts of these two bags, these two pockets. It's funny, as I'm doing this, I feel like I don't know if anybody's ever been stopped with a first aid bag or otherwise, whether police are what's in that bag, and you have to do everything very carefully and like no sudden moves, and that's how I feel like I'm doing it right now. Like, here it is, Officer John. I'm always nervous about those Australian officers. So first is some basic equipment. So I usually carry aspirin and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen. So I do carry those are probably the only drugs I have here. Well, they're the two most common because sometimes they just work great. So NSAIDs and aspirin, and they're legal to carry. There's no prescription necessary. That's important. The one drug I have that I have a prescription for, but you want to get some, I discussed it previously, but this is an EpiPen. This costs about $70 and lasts about 2 years. This is for anaphylactic shock. And I would suggest if you work at any kind of big gathering or just know anybody, I mean, there's always somebody who reacts to bee stings. And that's what this is for. So I'm not going to demonstrate how to use it, but I will talk about it later in animal bites and stings. But you should really have one if you can get one. But you do need a prescription, though many doctors, knowing you help people, will write you a prescription to carry it with you. If you're medical person, you can often buy these things in ampules where you just get the thing that's in there and just get a syringe, and then it's only a few bucks. But I don't have that. I carry some razor blades, disposable razors, and they're usually for shaving they're for shaving hair off of humans and often really dogs that I work with. So if you're going to patch somebody up after they get a bad wound or a dog bite, or a dog attacking another dog, the way that dog skins come off, the way that the connective tissue is attached is different. And so in order to patch stuff back up, you have to shave the animal. So I carry disposable razors to shave either human skin if I have to patch that up, or human hair, which is on top of skin, or dogs. I don't work so much with cats. Usually I'm working with dog bites. This is a syringe without a needle in it, and I use it as an irrigation syringe. So if you have a deep wound and you need to clean it out, you can put water in here and you can flush it out just by giving it some pressure. I want to warn you right now that if you do that it hurts. If anybody has a puncture wound and you irrigate it, you have to steady their arm or leg or whatever body part, because when you put pressure of water in them, people react. It just hurts a lot. So you can also give them herbs, as we'll talk about, to reduce the pain, but it's just a consideration. The other thing, by the way, you can do with these things is you can put tinctures or teas in them as well. It's not coming in contact with them, so it's safe that way. It doesn't have to be sterilized in the same way. It just has to be cleaned. But if somebody had a wound and I want to put golden seal in there, for instance, I could put some golden seal tincture in alcohol in water, and then I can irrigate it with that as well. So irrigation syringe. Eye cups. We'll spend a fair amount of time talking about eye cups. I like a nice glass one, but they do weigh a lot. They don't break easy, though. But you can use plastic eye cups. But they're really important in a first aid kit. We'll do a section on eye cups. This is razor blades and safety pins for any time I would need razor blades and safety pins. Q-tips, cotton swabs. And this is crazy glue. And I do sometimes use crazy glue for wounds that won't stay closed and I don't stitch. So there's a kind of crazy glue. There's a kind of super glue, crazy glue, very strong adhesive glue that is made, it's called Dermabond, and it's made for mammals, animals, humans. I don't have it. It's expensive. I don't really know if you need a prescription or not, but this is what I use. But if it's a lot of skin that needs to be put together and I can't do it, I just suggest a hospital. So, but I have used it on dogs as well. The way that their skin comes off, you can put it back on. The problem is it can come off again, the way that it bonds together. But that's what the crazy glue is for. It's definitely to put wounds together. But you have to be careful because, you know, if you have an infection and you crazy glue it together and you crazy glue on top of the infection, that infection is now going to have what it really desires, which is a slightly anaerobic environment. And that some bacteria just love that. So instead of this 21% oxygen, all of a sudden you close it and maybe you have 10% oxygen. And some bacteria will thrive, and there's no way for it to be released. So you have to be careful when you do these things. But the crazy glue. Here, I mentioned applicators for salves before, and that's what these are. They're just, you know, ice cream sticks or whatever you want to call them, but just applicators. That rubber band is one way to show you what heat does to your first aid bag. Next, I have a couple of raw herbs. I don't use a lot of plant material, raw plant material, because making tea just takes too much time. So back at the camp or the clinic or wherever I'm working, I might have lots and lots of things to make tea, but on the run, not many. But there are some plants that I use, and I have just I have three here. Well, actually I have two. The first thing I just want to, these are ginger candies. And they're usually given to people. They are okay for stomach aches, but they just make people really happy, and it's kind of a faux medicine. So people are taking these, and ginger can help some people's belly aches, but some people just feel miserable, and you know, eating some sweet ginger makes them feel good. So I have ginger candies for stomach aches and just as a sweet treat. They're really heavy though, is the problem with them. And also if the person's diabetic, this is crazy sugary or just hyperglycemic, right? A lot of sugar in here. But tasty. This is the Tora leaf, and I'm not sure I'm going to discuss much how to use it, but it's used as an anticholinergic for asthma. But it's tricky stuff, but I use it in plant material, in plant form. And these are licorice sticks, much safer. I use a lot of licorice sticks in first aid practice for a bunch of reasons. Licorice sticks taste pretty good. Some people hate licorice, so you have to give something else. These are nice small sizes. When you're buying them, if they're more yellow, they're going to be sweeter. So it's just a consideration. They're inexpensive. You know, licorice is about $7 a pound. So you can just chew them up for a variety of situations. We'll talk about licorice, but they're anti-inflammatory and they're demulcent. So they're really nice for just sore throats. So if there's nothing complicated going on, the person's been outdoors and yelling or doing first aid or just breathing in hot air, out doing exercise, licorice sticks are really nice to chew and swallow. And there's a few other things to use them for, but that by itself, just people have sore throats, non-infectious, licorice sticks could be helpful. So not Twizzlers, but licorice sticks. Though I bet some people would really appreciate Twizzlers. Candy goes for a premium often at some of the events I'm at. So that's those pockets. In here, this is just overstock. I have too many things that are in bottles that don't fit. But the one thing I do want to show here is I carry a multi-purpose tool. I often wear it on me, but not always. I have a bunch of stuff on my belt. But the multi-purpose tool, as you can imagine, one of the most handy things is just pliers. I often find myself using pliers, sometimes to pull stuff out of people or to fix things. So it's good to have a good quality multi-purpose tool. This is a Leatherman, but there's lots of them. Don't get the really complex ones. Usually 2/3 of the things on them I don't see get used very much. And so then there's all individual things that we'll discuss with time, but that is pretty much a quick tour of my first aid bag. I hope that it gives you all ideas on how to make your own. Now this is pretty complex, and this is going to cover a lot of situations. Yours could be much smaller. Things I would suggest is pockets with zippers to just put stuff so it doesn't flap open. Having a really handy pocket for things like flashlights and gloves. Making it so that there's some, it's stiff and a little spongy in between, so it has more give, things will break less. Consider getting plastic bottles. Making somehow a way to know so that you can find out easily what's in the bottle. I'm also going to show a first aid checklist in just a second so I know what's in here. So one of the parts I want to show here is my first aid checklist. I made this checklist mostly for myself, but it's also available on the website that you're looking at now, and you can download it, and you can also change it in any way that helps make it more usable for you. So it's the first aid checklist, and basically it has all the things that I generally bring to first aid, but it also has, when I use it, I don't have all of these things at every occasion. So what I'll do is I'll put the amount of how much I have, 1 ounce, 2 ounce, or more than that, 4 ounces or 8 ounces. So I'll have that in a column. And the reason that there's all these different columns, because it's the different kinds of first aid equipment that I bring, or first aid bags. So P is my personal bag. In another segment, I discussed how it's important to carry your own medicine, so I do have a personal bag, and I'll have what's in that. So that bag is just usually my hands only. And then this is usually going to be in these over here, are going to be in this bag. So whether the bottle is 1 ounce or 2 ounce or a different size. Then the medicine by its common name and scientific name, or if it's a formula, by its common name. And then B is for backstock, which is how much I have in backstock. And so you can see that it's really handy. So if I look through this bag, I would have maybe 1 ounce of acute respiratory, 1 ounce of anemone, and I might have another 2 ounce of anemone, so I might have 1 and a 2 in anemone, saying I have 1 in the bag and then maybe 1 in backstock. So I will have what's in the bag and what's in the backstock, so I know how much I have. And so a lot of it is tinctures. Once again, you can use this. And then after tinctures, there's liniments, vinegars. You'll note there's much less of those. Syrups, oils, salves and balms, essential oils, other medicines and Chinese-based medicines, powders, single herbs. This list, by the way, constantly changes. I'm not sure if this is a recent list or an older list. So when you go online, when you download it, you'll just find it slightly different. I'm always changing things just so they make more sense to me over time. And then this is the different supplies, like many things like applicators, punchy cords. What do we have here? Cotton balls, a cot for people to lay in. So then there's this part as well. Then in the back, it's just notes to myself. The last thing I want to just mention is when I go and do first aid, when I come home, I'll try to type up a report on what I saw there to teach myself and to use again. So this is a rainbow gathering from 2008, and this is the foot injuries and the things I use to treat foot injuries. This is about a dog-on-dog injuries that I saw a lot this year. But it's just really helpful because if you have a mind like mine, which means you forget easily, it's just really helpful to read these things and like, oh, right, I need to bring this medicine. Oh, right, I need to increase my skills there. So it's really helpful for me to have the things I used, the things I didn't use, those things that really came in important. And also I can change my pack and make it lighter and heavier with time with this. And so this is I hope you have learned something about making your own first aid bag. Right, John.